Welcome to the Better Together podcast, where we look for ways we can work together to advance the gospel of Jesus Christ. Today, I have with us Tyler Harden. He is working with Firm Foundations. And Tyler, basically, you do a lot of work with churches, trying to help them to know their community well, trying to help them to think about the language and outreach activities that would be there with them. And I would say you've really been uniquely prepared for this. You used to work in newspapers and help them with marketing.
Yeah.
Why don't we start by just getting you to share with our audience a bit about your background and what Firm Foundations is doing today?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm super excited. We've worked with a lot of Free Will Baptist church planters, probably 6 or 7 at this point. Several folks listening probably know Josh Bennett as one of them, Josh Hampton, Jim Kilgore, several others. And so it's been a pleasure being able to work with them.
Don't they, Tyler?
They all start with J, so it's always tricky to remember all their names.
So for me, I'll be Josh's. I forgot,
Yes. So, but all amazing hearts. I've really enjoyed everything we've been able to do thus far. But yeah, so to dig into my background a little bit. So I worked, like you said, at a newspaper for about 12 years in marketing, had held several roles. They're helping businesses, nonprofits, all that kind of stuff, actually leverage market research to better advertise, make money, those kinds of things. As an analyst.
Now for the kingdom.
Now for the kingdom. So yeah, I was there for about 12 years. Actually, my business partner also was there for 14 years. At one point, they decided they did not need a marketing department anymore. And so found myself unemployed suddenly with a 3rd child on the way. And really in just that time of sort of desperate prayer of what's next, God, I really felt God saying, hey, actually the last couple of years of your career were intended to prepare you for what I have next. And that it was to use our skills and our gifts to really help churches and grow the kingdom. So a month after getting laid off, we co-founded Firm Foundations Marketing. Craziest thing, never planned to do that. I've always had that entrepreneurial spirit, but that was not in my long-term plan. I didn't see that, the big change coming, but certainly God prepared us for it. So we're about 5.5 years in now. So that means about halfway into our business, we had the joy of COVID. And so I fully can resonate with some of our church planting friends that tried to plant in that season, because I was trying to grow a business in that season. But God has always been faithful and seen us through. So we work with churches exclusively now. We work with large churches, mega churches, all the way down to pre-planting church planters all across the country. So a lot of what we do with the bigger churches, we actually scale down to help the smaller churches that can't afford some of the craziness that we do with the big churches. But ultimately, why we do this is we've seen over the years that a lot of churches don't have an abundance of resources, right? You don't have a lot of time, you don't have a lot of money, not a lot of people. And there's so many ideas out there. There's this chorus of ideas sort of singing at you, available at your fingertips with a Google search or a Facebook group or whatever. And it's tempting to just import tactics from some other church in some other city, or from some guru on the internet, or, some well-intended congregational member or something like that. But we believe that your church is actually uniquely equipped to reach specific people in your community. But the problem is a lot of pastors don't know how to actually find them. They don't know who they are. They don't know where they're at and what they really need from you. So that's where we come in at Firm Foundations, is we help pastors and church leaders utilize community research to really discover your church's ideal audience and to define your message and develop the strategies you need to engage those people, so that you can ultimately focus your resources better, serve your community well, and grow your church with purpose. Because we don't want to see a scattered shotgun approach, doing all these good things and not focusing on the great things. And I think that's one thing I've learned in again, 5.5 years of serving churches, is I've become more aware of, we are all part of the big C church, and each church is playing a different role, and we don't have to have that burden of reaching everybody, because that's what the church down the street is for, and the church down the street from them. We all kind of work together to reach this, this mosaic of people in our community.
And so, we've had a lot of churches that have done the Know Your Community report through Church Answers. Yeah. And you guys are using Esri and Census, and I think Aspirin data, all kinds of data as well. Let's just start out, and then we'll get into that last little part where you mentioned knowing about your church and who your church is best equipped to reach. But let's start out by just reinforcing, why is it so important for churches to know their community? Why does that matter?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I just want to say I'm a Church Answers certified church consultant. So I do believe and love the Know Your Community report that you guys are already familiar with. A lot of churches across the country you're familiar with. Our approach is a little bit different, and we can delve into that here in a little bit. But I think it's Sam Rayner. It's one of the Rayners that always says you need to know your community in order to reach your community, and that is 100% true. And actually, when I was preparing for our recording today, one thing that kind of just came to mind was one of the verses in 1 Corinthians 13, where if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. And it's like, well, how we show love to our community is by understanding who they are. Yeah. And when we don't do that, we're the resounding gong or clanging cymbal. We're just noise. And we want to be beautiful music that speaks to someone's heart. And so you do that by actually understanding people at a deeper level. And so that's kind of what we focus on, is that deeper level understanding of a specific group of folks. So know your community is great for top level, broad picture type of things. But if you want to understand what your people are dealing with and what's important to them or where they need help, that's kind of where
it's your step
solution.
So let's stop on that for a bit, because some folks may say, hey, I don't want to hear this marketer and all that. Let's just be clear, Tyler's more than the marketer. But anyway, let's think a bit about 1 Corinthians 9. The whole chapter, Paul is talking about being a servant. And then we think about the last section where he says, to the Jew, I became as a Jew, and those without the law. And then he talks about how he disciplined himself. So really, part of what you're getting at is, I got to know who's out there.
Yeah.
I got to be able to put myself in their shoes a bit to try to reach them. And then the next step, and this is really, I think, something you guys have kind of perfected, if you will. I've got to know who we are as a church, and try to use, what we have and we're best equipped to reach. So unpack that a little bit. That's part of what you all do, trying to help churches figure out who are we best equipped or made to reach, if you will.
Yeah. So I'm going to take a step back to sort of set the stage a little bit.
Okay.
So the research that we have kind of classifies American households into one of 71 different groups, which to some people might sound like a lot and might sound like not enough, but I think that's a good starting point. There's 71 different groups that we can all kind of be classified under, based on how we live, how we shop, what we think, feel, all those kinds of things. And so, for example, we worked with one church in Virginia. Their church plant, they were about 6 months after planting, or after launching, mind you, and they needed their website redone. They didn't have a consistent way of talking. They knew they needed some new language, and so we said, well, we can do that, but our first step is we got to understand who your target audience is. Who are your ideal audiences? And this particular pastor, he was like, well, I mean, we don't really need this whole market research thing. Like, I know who lives here. Like, it's a bunch of rich white folks. Like, I don't need the research to tell me that. I know that. So he conceded. He's like, all right, fine. If it's part of your process, we'll just go through it. I was like, okay, just now I got to prove it.
Yes.
And so, again, we have this whole intake process that we've developed over the years, working with churches all over the place of different sizes and different, flavors, if you will. And we identified, so there were 58 of the 71 different groups within 15 minutes of this pastor's church plant.
Wow.
So right off the bat, that tells you, okay, maybe we don't know people as well as we think we do.
Yes.
And I think, honestly, it's just human nature, right? We assume because we drive similar cars, or our kids go to the same school, we shop at the same grocery store, that we all kind of think the same. And that's just not reality, because there's a big difference between, I mean, just to break it down at a simple level, between a 2-parent household and a single parent household. Yes. The stressors on that single parent's lives are significantly greater than somebody that's got 2 incomes or has a spouse to support them through the hard times and those kinds of things. So you start to factor in, like, okay, that's one thing. How does income level play in? How does, like, how old our kids are, or do we have our adult parents living in the house in the basement or something? multi-generational households. All those things contribute to what make us us. So out of that 58, we actually helped him identify the best 3 for his church, right? We all know that there's reasons why people pick one church versus another. Some people want the big mega church. Some people want the really small, the traditional, or the very modern. Like, there's all these things that go into it for a variety of reasons. We identified 3. And he was actually, in this case, he's like, well, of those 3, I'm going to focus on these 2, because that one is that the older group of the 3 that you provided, like, I'm happy if they come. I'm glad that they're come, but I'm going to really focus all my resources on intentionally reaching these other 2. And so that church is now growing. They moved into a new location where they're talking about adding a second service now when I was visiting with them recently. Mm-hmm. And so that's just one example that kind of shows like the kind of focus and clarity and intentionality and the ultimate benefit. Because I think what you're trying to do by understanding who your church is best equipped to reach is one, create clear expectations with people, right? So when you're talking about your church, or they go on your church website or something like that, they can more immediately determine, is this church for me or is it not? Simple, basic, because I think the struggle is to be generic, and that doesn't help anybody. That creates unmet expectations when they show up. And then the other part of that is it creates people that stick. So when you're very clear about who you're best equipped to reach and how you can serve them, they're more likely to become a first-time guest, and then a second-time guest, and then a long-time member.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we've got, in a lot of the communities we work in, we've got a lot of different churches. Some of the communities, yes, there wouldn't be as many churches, but I think what I'm hearing from you is that every church is unique, just like every community is unique. And so figure out kind of how you've been made. Yep. And that's part of the language, figuring out how to speak to those people that you're supposed to reach, if you will. Yes. Get into that a little bit, how you guys even use messaging. I know some people may say, oh no, but again, I do think we have examples. And 1 Corinthians 9, we mentioned, I think we even have examples. Think about Jesus is reaching all kinds of different people. Paul's another example. And sometimes the messaging, you think about Paul of the Areopagus and so forth. So talk a little bit about that and how you help churches with that.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus is, of course, a great example. I mean, the illustrations that he used when communicating with people were very intentional, right? You use the agricultural language to speak to an agricultural society. And that same kind of concept applies to us here in America, trying to reach people in our local community, whether that's rural or, urban or what have you. We have to communicate who we are without kind of talking about ourselves all the time.
Yeah.
In order to open up that conversation with folks, that digital conversation, if you will, if they hit your website, for example, you have to show that you understand them. Because if we just start saying, hey, this is when we meet, this is an upcoming event, like those are not bad things, but they're not helpful. They don't show that I get you and you were made for me and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so, when we work with messaging, so it's to communicate about the brand, about the church to that ideal audience in a way that's incredibly relevant. So we talk about things like, what are their pain points? What do they want to achieve? Where does that person hope to be in life? Right. Mm-hmm. Big picture. How does the church help them get there? Mm-hmm. What's the pathway? Who else in the church has experienced that kind of transformation in their life? Because I think that's, just a simple, basic, practical step for some folks who, maybe can't afford to hire a marketer or something. Like, your one-liner is your problem and a solution and your transformation. Like that, those 3 steps create a one-sentence impact statement that communicates who you're for, how you help them, and what life is like on the other side of getting help. And so, when we work with churches to identify their target audience, one of the things that we factor in is what is your goal? What is your vision as a church? And particularly when it comes to established churches, it's incredibly important because, they probably don't want to, they're in a place where they don't want to do things the way they've always done them. So while there's some element of factoring in their current culture and way of doing things, part of our process is understanding what that vision, what that goal is, like we worked with a church outside of the Washington, D.C. area, for example, that over the years, their members had moved. They created like a church donut is what I like to call it. Their members had moved out into the suburbs once they started having kids, having money. And so that big church was no longer a community church. They had a lot of people, they had a lot of money, they had a lot of building resources, like all those kinds of things, but they weren't reaching the people around them anymore. And with their members living so far away, they weren't going to invite their neighbors to drive that same distance to come into the church anymore. So for them, the goal was, how do we shift our focus? And it was honestly a very difficult conversation to have with them, because it was going to require significant change. But that's why this isn't a cookie cutter process. This isn't like we get an intake form, we click a button and boom, here's your stuff. It's, you know, we're leaning on 20 years of experience doing this, and really trying to understand who you are and where you want to go, so that we can help you get there with clarity. And it's the other thing is, we don't, you know, pastors don't need to become market researchers as like a side hustle, right? Right. You've better things to do, and so leave it to the professionals, so to speak. And so I think that's where it's super helpful. You know, our whole process takes a week, right? It's super quick, allows you to, no matter what season you're in the church, to start to lay the groundwork to take action. But it's really focused on your culture, your DNA, your leadership style, all those kinds of things that really impact who you are as a church, to find those people in your community that are going to resonate with either who you are or where you want to go.
Yeah, good. And so folks want to learn more about what you all do, they can go to your website, and actually they could check out a sample report, couldn't they?
Yes, absolutely. So the sample is the best way for a lot of folks to get started, because I know it's really hard to envision what this looks like when you haven't seen it. And especially if you're familiar with Know Your Community report, this is a pivot from that. So I don't want you to assume that they are the same thing. Yeah. And so, yeah, the website to see the sample, to get started, to even purchase, if you would like, is actually ministryreset.com. And so that is exclusively for the research side of things. You can go right there and take a look at the sample. Absolutely. So that's a great first step for folks. Really helps open eyes. So you get 3 ideal audiences. So the top 3 groups for your church to reach. And as part of that as well, we also have these sort of practical printable posters that are like a summary of your audience, because the report that you get is about 80 pages. You know, it's not focused on your 3 groups. Which is an amazing thing for readers. I am not a huge reader myself. My reading comprehension is not amazing. So I was like, how can I help people that need something simple in front of them?
Yes.
So as part of that, and this is also part of the experience of working with some of the larger churches, as communications directors needed something that they could keep in front of them on a regular basis when they were developing campaigns and things like that. So we've got those printable posters as well that kind of hits the highlights for each of your 3 audiences. Super handy when especially if you have meetings with your ministry leaders and those kinds of things, or you're approaching a big season, maybe it's Easter and VBS, and you want to make sure you're relevant, like kind of just reminds you and everyone in the room what's important for reaching those folks, so you can stay focused and on mission and not get tempted by all those distractions that are definitely out there.
That's good. And I think somewhere we've got a quote from a church planner who I'm sure his name starts with a J. Actually, I think it was Justin.
It's Justin. Yes.
Yeah. Who says, you know your community helps you learn about your community and know who's in your community. And really a lot of the information that Tyler's talking about here helps you to, figure out ways to reach those folks. So it's a 2-pronged process.
Absolutely. I think they do work hand in hand.
Yeah.
I think Know Your Community can be really insightful for sort of developing your missional base.
Yeah.
But as far as building the church itself, that's where ours kind of comes into play. So
kind of take the baton and pass it on, if you will, so to speak. Yep. So I really encourage our listeners, number one, if you've not done Know Your Community, reach out to us, NAFWB.org/know, and we can get that set up. Board of Retirement actually, if you're a recipient of, if you participate, they actually take care of that for you. So check that out. And then I encourage you to check out the website Tyler has. Reach out to him. You can see he's very personable, and he and his team will do what they can. And I know we've talked a lot about church plants, and so you guys are working with Free Will Baptist North American Ministries, but also you've got you've worked with churches doing revitalization and so forth as well, Tyler. So there's all kinds of things that they could use that you have, right?
Right, absolutely. So yeah, start the conversation, so to speak, at ministryreset.com. It's easiest to remember. We've got a couple of websites, but that's the main one to go to for the research stuff. And we can be in touch if you download that sample there. You'll start to hear from us that way. So,
well, good job. Good job, Tyler. Thank you for sharing with us today. Thank you for what you all are doing. I'm going to point out you're in Virginia. We'll leave it at that. That's pretty cool and not so far from where some of our churches are. So thank you for the good work you're doing. And I appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today and what you're doing for the kingdom.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to serving more of your churches.
And I want to thank you, all our listeners. Maybe you're listening in and you think, oh, this person would benefit from this podcast. Take it, share it, do what you can to get that information out there. Remember, every little thing we do, it really does help, and we truly are better together. Thank you.